There's one word in American politics that can turn a normal policy conversation into a hostage situation.
The rise of socialism.
Socialism. Socialism.
Socialism. Americans should be petrified of socialism.
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 This is the United States of America. It's at our doorstep.
And this is the weirdest thing about American politics. The United States doesn't actually hate government support. America loves government support. We love Social Security, Medicare, and tax credits. We love subsidized mortgages, public schools, roads, and farm aid. We love defense contracts, bank rescues, airline bailouts, and PPP loan forgiveness. America loves situation-specific socialism. We just have one very specific rule. Don't call it that. So, let's take a look.
Karl Marx believed that capitalism, as he saw it in the 19th century, was stagnating, beginning to decay.
You want to see capitalism at work? KFC announcing a limited release gravy-scented candle to fill your home with that, quote, incredible aroma of KFC gravy.
Before we go any further, we need to clean up one gigantic misunderstanding. You see, when Americans point to Europe and say socialism, they do not usually mean actual socialism in the classic sense. They do not mean the government owns every factory, banning private property, abolishing markets, and putting some bureaucrat in charge of a bakery. Listen, every single European nation has a capitalist economy. Germany is capitalist, France is capitalist, so is Denmark, Sweden, the Netherlands, all capitalist. They have private companies, stock markets, billionaires, entrepreneurs, luxury brands, banks, and plenty of inequality. For goodness sakes, the last time a Marxist-Leninist communist regime existed in Europe was in December of 1991, 35 years ago. What Europe often has is a social market economy or a social democratic welfare state layered on top of capitalism. Germany's own economic model, the soziale Marktwirtschaft, is built around the idea that markets can create prosperity, but markets also need rules, competition, worker protections, and a floor below which citizens should not fall. The German government describes the social market economy as combining economic efficiency with social justice. Even the European Union's treaties refer to the goal of a highly competitive social market economy. It's aimed at full employment and social progress. And that phrase matters. A highly competitive social market economy. Not abolish markets, not destroy private business, not the government owns your property. A social market economy says that, yeah, capitalism is powerful, but capitalism should serve society, not the other way around. And that's exactly where the American vocabulary breaks down. Because in the United States, the word socialism often does not describe a policy. It describes a feeling, a fear, a historical reflex, and most importantly, a political alarm bell.
Capitalism is good because capitalism is freedom. Socialism is bad because socialism is tyranny. Not it's an aspect of tyranny. Socialism itself is tyranny.
So to understand why Americans react this way, you have to understand that socialism in the United States is not just an economic term. It's a Cold War ghost story. The United States spent much of the 20th century defining itself against communism, and that made sense geopolitically in some obvious ways. The Soviet Union was a real rival. Soviet authoritarianism was real. The Cold War was real. But domestically, anti-communism became more than foreign policy. It became a cultural sorting mechanism. After World War II, the United States entered the second Red Scare. American leaders repeatedly told the public that communists could be lurking anywhere. Teachers, professors, labor organizers, artists, journalists. And let's be real for a second, that's not a normal policy debate. That's a political atmosphere where economic disagreement starts to sound a heck of a lot like treason. And once that happens, the word socialism stops meaning a specific relationship between the state and an economy. It starts to imply that this is something foreign, dangerous, un-American, authoritarian, lazy, and weak. That is why today, Republicans who red-bait Democrats also accuse socialism of property theft, amnesty for criminals, and tyranny.
Democratic socialism is simply legalized theft.
Literally, we would be giving a license to steal. They would be creating a law to rob you blind.
Socialism, democratic socialism, or any otherwise will definitely rob the American people.
The themes are consistent in conservatism, but it's the 1962 film, The Truth About Communism, narrated by none other than Ronald Reagan, that is the modern GOP blueprint. In a serious tone, Reagan spoke of a peasant's lifetime savings taken by the Bolsheviks. Later Republicans like Senator Rand Paul updated this theme, saying that Senator Bernie Sanders' proposals, such as free education, constituted theft.
If I'm a physician in your community and you say you have a right to health care, do you have a right to beat down my door with the police, escort me away, and force me to take care of you? That's ultimately what the right to free health care would be.
So even when Americans discuss policies that are completely normal in capitalist European democracies, universal health care, paid leave, stronger unions, tuition-free university, for example, well, those policies are not debated only on their merits. They are dragged into this haunted, vulgar vocabulary. And let's be honest, once the word socialism enters the room, well, that room tends to devolve into idiocy.
They want to take your pickup truck. They want to rebuild your home. They want to take away your hamburgers. This is what Stalin dreamt about, but never achieved.
But despite the televised bickering and squabbling, the reality is that Americans are much more comfortable with social market ideas when you remove the scary label. Take healthcare, for example. A 2025 Pew Research Center survey found that 66% of Americans say that the federal government does have a responsibility to make sure all Americans have healthcare coverage. And that is not a fringe socialist hippie commune in Vermont. That's 2/3 of the country. Or, as another example, take big entitlement programs. A 2024 KFF poll found that at least 3/4 of voters had favorable views of Medicare, Social Security, and Medicaid. Now imagine describing those from scratch. A government-run pension program by payroll taxes, a government health insurance program for seniors, a government health program for low-income people. Those didn't already exist and someone proposed them today, half its cable news would treat it like the Bolsheviks had landed in Ohio. But honestly, because they already exist and because millions of Americans rely on them, they aren't socialism at all. They become earned benefits. Listen, a policy becomes dangerous socialism when it is proposed for someone else, but it becomes common sense when your family depends on it. And paid leave is similar. Pew found broad support for paid family and medical leave. 82% of Americans supported it for mothers after birth or adoption. 69% supported paid paternity leave, and 85% supported paid leave for workers dealing with their own serious health condition. And again, this is not some obscure Marxist demand. This is basic social policy that most advanced capitalist countries already figured out decades ago. Same with wages. In 2021, Pew found that 62% of Americans supported raising the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. So the American public is not always allergic to social democratic policies. I think what it's really allergic to is the branding. Say European-style social protection and people get nervous, but if you instead frame these ideas as protecting seniors, helping workers, or keeping rural hospitals open, well, suddenly that exact same political instinct becomes normal. And let me make myself clear. The United States is not a country that hates public spending. America is a country that just likes to argue over which groups deserve it. In fact, President Donald Trump has recently taken it upon himself to obtain partial U.S. government ownership of major companies, entangling the government with private enterprise in a way that would disgust Republicans of the past. The problem is that message is often lost if your news sources aren't reporting it in a fair and balanced manner. That's why I always use our sponsor, Ground News, because it gives me an easy, data-driven, and objective way to read the news. On Ground News, every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of political bias, factuality, and the ownership of sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. And a recent story I read on Ground News regarding the Trump purchase of a 10% stake in chip manufacturer Intel and a partnership with Apple was covered by over 145 news sources. And I've been using their new comparison feature to see specific differences in left and right reporting. For this story, a left-leaning outlet underscores that the deal is not just about stepping up efforts to secure the U.S. supply chains for critical minerals and semiconductors, but also mentions that this strategy of taking equity stakes in companies is ultimately aimed at reducing reliance on foreign entities. Meanwhile, a right-leaning outlet praises this public-private partnership as a moneymaker, leading their story with the line, "The Trump administration is making billions for the United States." If one side of the political spectrum is ignoring the story, the blind spot feed will let you know so that you can make up your own mind about how reliable that reporting is, which is a level of transparency that I very much appreciate when sifting through the data and reports on each subject I cover right here on my channel. So go head over to ground.news/Ashton to check it out, or click the link down in the description of this video. You can subscribe through my link to get 40% off the Vantage subscription, which includes unlimited access to all of their amazing features. Plus, when you subscribe, you're not only supporting me, you're also supporting an independent platform trying to make the news more transparent. And this is where I think it would be helpful to take a quick look at a European comparison, because Europeans are not living in a post-capitalist utopia. They complain constantly. Where I live in Germany, hating on Deutsche Bahn and government bureaucracy is practically a rite of passage. The French protest retirement reform like it's a national sport. And the British have been locked in a 400-year argument with their own public services. And yeah, I fully realize I'm generalizing a whole host of countries, but largely speaking, almost every single country still faces housing crises, inequality, aging populations, slow bureaucracy, high taxes, and political dysfunction. But what most Western European countries, specifically those that are part of the OECD, which are generally considered peer nations, what they do differently is that they make certain parts of life less terrifying. Healthcare is not usually tied to whether your employer likes you or not. And losing a job does not automatically mean losing your healthcare coverage. Having a baby does not typically require negotiating your recovery time with a middle manager. And university is not usually priced like a beach house. This is the European social market bargain. Yeah, you pay more upfront visibly through taxes and contributions, but the state, employers, and society absorb more of the risk. In the United States, however, the risk is just simply privatized. You may pay lower taxes in some cases, but then you pay more through premiums, deductibles, copays, student debt, childcare bills, private retirement accounts, car dependency, and the consistent fear that one bad event can financially vaporize you. The OECD makes this visible. Across OECD countries, public social spending averages about 1/5 of GDP, but private social spending, mainly health insurance and pensions, is especially high in the United States, Switzerland, and the Netherlands. And that means that the American system is not necessarily small government in the way Americans imagine. It is often a system where social costs are just pushed onto private channels, which almost always costs more. Instead of taxes, you pay premiums. Instead of public childcare, you pay daycare. Instead of public transit, you finance 2 cars. And this is the central irony. Americans often do not eliminate social spending. It just makes social spending more fragmented, more private, more stressful, and more expensive. But the double standard gets even stranger because while American politicians frequently attack Europe as socialist, weak, overregulated, and anti-business, they are quick to turn around and quietly copy Europe whenever the political need becomes impossible to ignore.
We don't do a very good job providing high quality, affordable childcare, and there are a lot of countries, a lot of our competitors do it.
When the United States wants paid family leave, people point to Europe. When Americans complain about healthcare costs, again, people point to Europe.
In Denmark, my guess is, please correct me if I'm wrong, probably the per capita cost in healthcare is half what it is in the United States. Is that a good guess?
Approximately, yes.
Okay. So the point is, they are able to run a high-quality healthcare system, probably better than ours, at half of the cost because it's a public healthcare system.
Not because Europe is perfect, but because European countries prove that these things are not science fiction. And for me, this is what makes the American debate so frustrating, because Americans are often told that, hey, you only have two options here. Option 1, pure free market capitalism. Option 2, Soviet collapse.
If healthcare is a constitutional right, then everything associated with good health would fall into the civil rights category. That's a form of communism because no country could afford those payments without seizing the assets of everybody else. It's impossible.
But the actual world is full of mixed economies. The United States is a mixed economy. So are Germany, France, Sweden, the United Kingdom, and Denmark. The argument is not really capitalism versus socialism. The argument is, who does the mixed economy serve? Does it socialize risk for everyone, or does it socialize risk for corporations and privatize risk for families? And that brings us to the most important form of American socialism of all, corporate socialism.
Can't you just tell me in absolute terms, how much money do you need to survive?
The slap in the face for American taxpayers.
They're going to guarantee a lot of Citigroup's assets.
We can't let anything happen to Boeing.
Giant taxpayer bailout.
Bail out Bitcoin.
The bailout of billionaires.
$12 billion in economic assistance to American farmers. $12 billion is a lot of money, Merrill. What do you think?
The funniest thing about America's fear of socialism is that the United States has already built an extremely generous welfare state. Just not for the people, but instead, the corporations. And to be clear here, corporate socialism is not socialism in the textbook sense. The government is not seizing the means of production and turning Goldman Sachs into a worker commune, as tempting as that might be after 2008. Corporate socialism means something a heck of a lot more cynical. It means private profit, public rescue. You see, when regular people ask for healthcare, paid leave, or affordable childcare, they are often told, well, how are we going to pay for that? But when a bank collapses, a defense contractor needs cost overruns covered, an airline needs rescue money, an AI data center wants public subsidies, or fossil fuel interests benefit from favorable tax treatment, suddenly the government discovers a very large checkbook behind the couch. And as I hinted at earlier, let's take a look at the 2008 financial crisis. The Troubled Asset Relief Program, or TARP, distributed about $443 billion US. After repayments and income, the final lifetime cost was much lower, about $31 billion, according to the Treasury and the government administrative oversight. Now, defenders will say, yes, but it stabilized the financial system. And you're right, that is partly the point, and goes to show that when the financial system is at risk, American politicians and the public at large understand systematic risk. We understand emergency intervention and that letting everything collapse would hurt innocent people. But when ordinary people face systematic risk, things like medical debt or housing instability, well, suddenly the whole country becomes a motivational speaker. Well, have you tried personal responsibility? Well, why don't you pick yourself up by your bootstraps? But then came COVID.
We want to make sure this money is available to small businesses that need it, people who have invested their entire life savings.
The Paycheck Protection Program became one of the largest business support programs in American history. As of May 2024, the Small Business Administration's Inspector General reported that the SBA had forgiven more than 10.5 million PPP loans, totaling over $750 billion. And absolutely, some of that money helped real small businesses survive. But it also revealed how quickly America can move when businesses become threatened. Suddenly, government help was not dependency, it was stabilization. Checks from the state were not immoral, they were liquidity. And again, the question is not whether every intervention was bad. The question is why the moral language changes depending on who receives the money.
A rough week for the banking industry.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank. The second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
In 2023, after Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank failed, the FDIC used a systemic risk exemption to protect uninsured depositors. The FDIC estimated that $16.3 billion of the cost of those bank failures was attributable to protecting uninsured depositors. And think about that phrase, systemic risk exemption. That's a beautiful phrase. Everyone should try using it in their personal life. Sorry, I can't pay this medical bill. I am invoking the systemic risk exemption. But let's be real. Normal people do not get systemic risk exemptions. They get collections. And it does not stop with the crisis bailouts. The CHIPS and Science Act committed nearly $53 billion for U.S. semiconductor manufacturing, research, development, and workforce investment, plus a 25% investment tax credit for semiconductor manufacturing capital investments. Now, I think you can make a very serious national security argument for semiconductor policy. I think there's a fair argument to be had that chips are too important to leave entirely to fragile global supply chains. Fine. But then admit what that is. That is industrial policy. That is the government picking a strategic sector and using public money to shape market outcomes. That's the kind of thing Americans often mock when Europe does it. They get called a nanny state or accused of cradle-to-grave welfare. But when America does it, it's suddenly patriotic. And farm subsidies are another example. The USDA noted that the Congressional Budget Office projected the 2018 Farm Act would cost $428 billion over 5 years from 2019 to 2023, with nutrition programs accounting for about 3/4 and crop insurance, conservation, and commodity programs making up nearly all of the rest. And again, I speak here as a farmer's daughter. These policies are defensible. Food security matters, rural economies matter, and farmers face weather risk, price swings, and global competition. But once again, the point I'm trying to make is that not every single subsidy is evil. The point I'm making is that America already accepts massive government interventions when the right constituency receives it. The same country that says the market should decide also spends enormous sums making sure the market does not decide too harshly for banks, farms, fossil fuels, airlines, automakers, and defense contractors. That is the double standard. Public health for workers is socialism, but public health for corporations is competitiveness. The United States does not hate socialism. It hates socialism with poor branding. And the best branding in American politics is not socialism, it's business. So when some Americans say that they hate European socialism, I think we need to ask a better question. Which part exactly? The universal healthcare? The paid leave? The cheaper university? The worker protections? The idea that citizens should not be one accident away from bankruptcy? Or is what you really hate just the image of it? Because the uncomfortable truth is that the United States already has a social contract. It's just incredibly uneven. Our social contract treats corporate failure as macroeconomic emergency and family failure as a character flaw. And so, oddly enough, that is exactly why socialism is actually quite useful as a word in American politics. Not because I think it actually explains anything logically. It doesn't. But because it basically ends a conversation before it can even start. It lets politicians take policies that work in other capitalist democracies and make them sound foreign, dangerous, and impossible. Meanwhile, those same politicians will support subsidies, bailouts, tax credits, and guarantees when the beneficiaries are powerful enough to call it something else. The real double standard is that government support for ordinary people is treated as a dangerous dependency, while the government support for corporation is treated as necessary economic management. So maybe the question is not whether America should become socialist. Maybe the question is a lot simpler. Why is America so comfortable socializing risk for corporations, but terrified of socializing security for people? Because Europe did not prove that capitalism has to disappear. European nations proved something more threatening to American politics. It proved that capitalism can be forced to behave. And that's the part that America loves. Just don't call it that. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about social market economies and policies down below in the comment section. What is something that you feel has really directly benefited you personally? And if you're an American watching this video, what is something that you think you would like to copy about a social market economy in your neck of the woods? And as always, if you enjoyed what you saw today, be sure to hit that thumbs up button. And for more content from Type Ashton, hit that subscribe button. So, I'll see you in the next video. Tschüss!